This conference, we're going to talk about the attacks against the church from the outside. And we're going on the theme of secular heresies. If you can imagine such a thing, there are secular heresies. Last night we touched on our Holy Father's homily just before he went into the conclave, where he uttered the now becoming famous line, the dictatorship of relativism, or the tyranny of relativism, that there has been a dictatorship sort of descend upon culture and society, particularly in the West. And as we reflect on that, we can see this dictatorship take form in many, many ways. When you reduce truth to a relative state, in other words, you have your truth and I have my truth, there is no the truth, or if there is the truth, there is no guaranteed access to that truth, then you spawn a whole number of, we could call them philosophies, ways of seeing the world that eventually come into conflict with each other. As a matter of fact, they come into conflict with each other almost immediately. One of the things that we see is atheism. The ultimate truth, there is a God, and God is the truth, is denied because there's no such thing as truth when you're living under a dictatorship of relativism. So there is no God, or if there is a God, you believe in him. I, however, choose not to believe in him. When you have something like atheism running amok, you get situations in cultures like communist Russia, like communist China, like Eastern Europe before the fall of the Iron Curtain. And all of this has real consequences in life. All of this. Hundreds of millions of people died under the reign of atheistic relativism. Hundreds of millions of people died under that reign in the 70 or so years that it was active, obviously active in Europe and Russia. And still today, you look at China, population of over 1 billion people, children murdered in the womb because the atheistic government sets up a policy that you can only have one child. The torture that goes on, and it is torture that goes on in China, to members of the Catholic faith. There's a number of bishops that are under house arrest. Others of them have died in prison. This is what you get when you deny the truth. So these discussions that you have in your backyards with friends and family members, where everybody sits around and says, well, if you want to believe that, that's okay. Do not be deluded by those somewhat innocent-sounding things. Those are the seedbed of where all of the evil comes from in the world. There is truth. There is objective truth. It must be understood. It must be conformed to in everything we do. When we look at how relativism spreads, and I just use atheism as one example of what comes from a relativistic system. When we look throughout the culture, through the secular culture, and by the way, the word secular is the same, its Latin root word, secula, is world, as in earth, as in this earthly existence. When we look at the way that relativism comes into our lives, we have to look at all of sort of the organs of the culture, the organs of a society. You know, how is a society made up? It's made up of a political system. It's made up of an economic system. It's made up of a judicial system. All of these things have become infected in the West. And again, the West, so we're sure everybody understands, we're talking about Europe, America, United States, Canada, Australia, sort of what we used to refer to as Christendom, which is no longer Christendom. And as we look out on this Western culture, which encompasses a large percentage of the human race, and we look out over this, what do we see? We see every single one of these societal institutions having become corrupt. various stages of corruption, certainly, but they're all corrupt with relativism. Every one of them has sort of thrown off the yoke of truth. If we study our Holy Father, Pope Benedict, if there's sort of one theme that runs throughout his pontificate now, going on 6 years, over 6 years, if we look at this, what's going on, what is he focusing on? He's focusing on this one single aspect that man has become separated from God. If you could say in one sentence, what is Benedict thinking? That is what he is thinking, that man has become separated from God. And when that happens, man sets himself up as God. And that takes us straight back to the Garden of Eden. What was the temptation? What was the temptation? Do this and you will become like gods. And so from that springing out, we have all kinds of poisons that come from that. We have the poison of the so-called sexual revolution and all of its concomitant woes. When you go through and just look at this one thing, this one little aspect of the 60s, of the 1960s, for example, what has been the fruit of that misunderstanding of the great power and gift of sex? Every possible thing you could imagine. Abortion, divorce, broken families, shattered homes, shattered psyches, just blown up nuclear, blown up relationships, the murder of children in the womb. It just goes on and on and on. When we think about the extreme damage that has come to society because of just this one misapplication of the great power of our sexuality. And it's interesting as you look into you always have to see things as a Catholic. We always have to see things in sort of the context of the great spiritual battle. And if we ever lose sight that we're in that war, we lose sight of everything. Anything can come in the door if we take our eyes off that particular thing. Everything else down here is detail. Now, granted, they can be horrible details, but they're all details. We either accept the fact that there is a loving God who desires that we use our free will he gave us to come to him, and there is an opposition to that. We either accept that worldview or we don't. And relativism says this worldview is not correct. The worldview is, and they'll spawn out, whatever you want to say it is. I'm free to do what I want with my own body. Don't tell me what to do. Keep your rosaries off my ovaries. You've seen all of these placards at the various abortion gatherings, and to use abortion, for example. You have a group of people who then all of a sudden insist, well, since there is no the truth and there is no the spiritual battle, and we're free to do whatever we want, then I, Bob, want to marry Steve. And you simply can't stop me, and your laws are discriminatory, and they're unfair, and they're violating my human rights. Why? Because all of this is born of a system that refuses, that is an antithetical, is in war with this system. There are two orthodoxies on earth. One is there is an objective truth, and the other is there is no objective truth, or if there is, we don't have access to it. In either case, the result is the same on this side. When we look at the world that way, everything else makes sense. Got it. That's why somebody who wants to be in support, for example, of homosexual so-called marriage can arrive at that conclusion. There's nothing particularly sacred, because sacred belongs to this worldview. There's nothing sacred about marriage, for example. What is marriage? Over in this non-truth worldview, what is marriage? It's an arrangement between usually two people who have some sort of emotional tie with each other, some sort of what they consider sexual complementarity, who throw all of their assets in together and kind of keep living like that until such a time one of those aspects is gone. The emotion is gone, the sexual complementarity and interest is gone, or the assets are spent. Now it's time to move on. That's what marriage is in this worldview. In this worldview, where there is truth, marriage is a sacrament. It is an imitation. It is a reflection of the life of the Holy Trinity. It is a reflection of the life of the mystery of Christ married to his church. And so therefore a whole set of beliefs and actions and choices must bubble down from this. The same way over here, different choices and actions bubble up from this particular view of the world. It's really not that difficult when you stop and consider that these are two world orthodoxies in diabolical clash with each other. That's what they are. That's what's going on. So when we look at the world and we think, okay, what are the secular heresies of the world? Well, you could name hundreds of them. You could name hundreds of them. I don't have a duty, for example, to go to church and worship a God because I either don't believe there's a God or I'm perfectly fine worshiping him on the golf course on Sunday mornings. And who are you to tell me I can't do that? Who are you to tell me anything? And what comes from this is a whole sort of spew of these errant understandings of what used to be good and noble over here. Tolerance, non-judgmentalism, all of these things are good virtues in and of themselves while properly understood in this worldview of the truth. But separated from that worldview, when you move over here, all of a sudden, permissiveness becomes viewed as tolerance. Judgmentalism gets a whole different kind of understanding that you're somehow denying a right. You're denying this, you're limiting me, you're discriminating against me. And this worldview presents a corrupt understanding of truth. It becomes a dictatorship of relativism because we are enslaved. And please note that word. People are enslaved when they do not live by the truth. Ask the alcoholic. Ask the drug addict. Ask the parents who've been either divorced or remarried 2-3 times. Ask the children of those divorced couples and those broken homes who now have a problem ever being able to identify what love really is and how, as they grow up, how do they respond to these situations. When someone comes into their life, is their touchstone because of how they saw, the examples they saw when they grew up? Is their touchstone to love a selfish touchstone? I have to look out for number one, guard myself first. This becomes enslaving. And what happens after a while, as you proceed down generations, the scales begin to tip and society starts to become unhinged. And it always begins. If you look throughout history, it always begins with a corruption of morals, which always happens because people begin to deny the truth. Well, later on today, we'll get into this one little, this other part about specifically theological stuff, but I do want to touch on this one thing right now, sort of pull ahead as a preview. When we look at the history of the church, the heresies in the church that have happened because there has not been a proper balance at one period or another period of understanding who our blessed Lord is. All the heresies in the church ultimately come down to Christological heresies, heresies about Christ. Either there is too much emphasis placed on his kingship, his divinity, to the detriment of his humanity, or it's the other way. The needle tips the other way, in which the divinity of Christ is essentially abandoned and the focus is too much on his humanity. The smart people in the church, the saints in the church, the doctors of the church, the great religious orders of the church, the popes, have always been the ones who have been able to keep that balance, understanding that it is not just God and it is not just man, but this Jesus is the God-man. And that de-emphasis in the culture today, where Jesus is not respected as God, he isn't spoken of as God, there isn't a God, there isn't truth. To deny there is a truth is to deny Christ. And that is what's at the heart of this failed orthodoxy on what we call the secular orthodoxy. So when we are missing a proper understanding of truth, everything else falls apart. Now, we know this individually. We know this in our lives. We're all hardwired for the truth, every one of us, from the time we're this tall. And those little children start asking those questions. Why is the grass green? Why is the sky blue? Mommy, where did I come from? All of these things well up in us because written into our hearts, hardwired by God when He made us and formed us in the womb, is a desire for the truth. So everybody who goes out seeking for the truth. We go out seeking for the truth because we believe that the truth will make us happy. No human being is capable of choosing to be unhappy. We can choose, certainly, to our choices, the results of our choices can make us unhappy. Certainly, they do quite often. But nobody is going out to make themselves unhappy. Even the person who commits suicide sees that as a better alternative to whatever their condition of life may be at that moment, emotional, physical, whatever it is. So they see this as, of two alternatives, they see this as the best alternative. We're wired for happiness. We want to do things that make ourselves happy. However, the disconnect is if we do not understand the truth, then we simply cannot ever get to that happiness. We might have moments of pleasure, physical pleasure or psychological pleasure, but pleasure dissipates. Pleasure dissipates pretty quickly. The problem in the secular understanding of truth is that it conflates and confuses pleasure with joy. Joy speaks to the soul, pleasure speaks to the body, because the body always needs satiating. It always needs more. It needs another meal. It needs another sexual fix. It needs another drink. It needs another drug. It needs another psychological something. It needs something to keep itself going. It's a hungry, voracious animal. Our physical natures always need something else. That is pleasure. Joy expands the soul. It increases. It makes a greater capacity for more joy. Pleasure doesn't do that. Pleasure turns us into craven, I need more. I have to have more. I haven't had enough. And no matter how much you eat on Thanksgiving, no matter how much you sit there and shove down Aunt Martha's cornbread because you really love it, you know what? Someday Aunt Martha's cornbread is the great full feeling you have from that is going to disappear. You're going to be hungry again. Joy doesn't work like that. And because, matter of fact, it works exactly the opposite. So because the world is absent the truth, because it seeks after pleasure, the joy that comes with the truth, the world cannot know. And our blessed Lord tells us this. I bring you a peace. I give you a peace. My peace I give to you. A peace the world cannot know. So as Catholics, our duty, as we touched on last night, is to take this joy to the world. But we have to be able to sit down and dialogue with the world. 50 or 60 years ago, things were different. They were way different, weren't they? They were extremely different. You had an entire culture that in all of those institutions, the courts, the media, the military, the political process to some degree, were all sort of built on the understanding of truth, and that we have a touchstone to the truth, and we must live a certain way. So there were, as you look through each one of these things, there were, in the entertainment industry, for example, there was a motion picture morality test, a decency test, an obscenity test. And if you could not do this, or if you didn't pass the test, the movie didn't get made. Or if it got made, it didn't get aired, it didn't get shown in theaters. Any of you been to a movie lately? As you move along through the political system. Okay, maybe there were always some scoundrels who were being elected. I'm sure there always were. But as you look through the system today, and you look who's being elected, The fellow in New York just recently, it was last month or 2 months ago, the senator from Idaho who got caught in the bathroom a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. You go down the list of moral perpetrators who occupy these high seats and these high levels of government, and you start to see, wow, there's been some sort of sea change here. When you go down and you look at all of the different institutions that we have, the courts all of a sudden are no longer rooted in the truth. They're rooted in expediency, they're rooted in whatever's the most sort of politically correct thing to do at the time. You want to see how a little misunderstanding in philosophy can result in the deaths of tens of millions of people? Here it is. Human beings are persons. Philosophical statement. A person, there are different types of persons. There are divine persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. There are angelic persons. There are human persons. We all have in common being, as in existence. We all exist. When a Supreme Court in 1973 flips those around and makes the philosophical mistake of saying you're only a human being if you are a person, and we're going to define person differently, all of a sudden you get Roe versus Wade, and right now, in counting the deaths of 56 million, 57 million just in the United States alone. One little philosophical twist, one thing moved, one little cog in the wheel moved, and the whole engine sputters, crashes and breaks down, crashes into society and results in the deaths of tens of millions of people, and counting. And that's just in the United States. I mean, you can take our horrible export of abortion and take it around the world, where every year, I believe the number is something like 100 million abortions occur every year annually. So why? Because there's no truth. There's no truth. And this is what happens under the dictatorship, the tyranny of relativism. People die under government, under the oversight of governments, as in communism. People die under the oversight of governments, as in abortion or euthanasia. The state assumes the power of God, whether it's a communist state, a socialist state, a state like the United States moving in that direction very rapidly. The state assumes the power to bestow rights, because since there is no God, since there is no truth, we, the state, will determine what is truth, and we will determine what rights you have, and more importantly, what rights you do not have. All of these heresies, and they are secular heresies, destroy the soul, just as theological heresies destroy the soul. And when people are not awake to this fact, they do not realize the extent of the rot. If anybody has ever been around a house that has been infested with termites, you will notice that the house doesn't start to kind of 1 year lean a little bit, and then 5 more years lean a little bit more, and then 20 years later lean a lot. The house is just sort of sitting there, and all of a sudden it collapses. Like that, it just goes boom, because the infestation is everywhere. In the last 50 years or so, let's give it a nice round number, in the last 50 years or so, there is not one area, not one cedar plank in the house of the society, of Western society, that has not been being gnawed away at by the secular heresies or ants of the secular heresy. Anybody who thinks this is not going to come crashing down is simply not in touch. It has to come crashing down. It has to. Now, what form that crash will take, who knows? But let me set up a little paradigm here for you. We call it 4 and 20. If you trace a culture over the course of 80 years, if you look at different age groups divide them equally into 4 brackets. 15 to 35 years old, 35 to 55, 55 to 75, and 75 to 95, and perhaps beyond, but we'll say that most people have met their maker by the time they're 95. If you look at each of these groups, as the early group, as the young group gets injected with the values of the culture, and then it moves up into the next group, it now starts to beget the next generation. Well, where did it get those values from? It got it from the generation above it. So as long as these generations keep cycling through and keep getting handed on to them the values and the morals and that whole structure that supports and uplifts the society, everything is fine. But when all of a sudden a generation steps in and sort of goes tilt, now it passes on those tilted or absent values to the next generation because it's the parents of the next generation. And so those 2 generations now sort of move down the line. Now, what was the child generation, which is now the young adult generation, now does the same thing with its generation. As you move through 4 cycles of this, all of a sudden there is no more living memory except in that kind of, way distant, very, very elderly population. As you move through, it takes 4 cycles of this to happen before there is no more living memory left. The living memory that now exists when these secular heresies were not ruling the day has now moved into that 4th block, that 75 to 95 group. It really is that age group. That's the only group that's left that really, really remembers. Now, I'm not talking about individual cases. I mean, this is obviously a broad brush. But it's really the 75 and older crowd that remembers when you didn't have to lock the doors, who remembers that you would never even speak of something like abortion, that divorce was horrible, not only for the people, but for the children, that children needed a father and a mother to raise them. Those values are in that generation, and that generation, within 20 years, will have passed away. If you go by the actuary tables that insurance companies use, that generation will be passed away within 10 years. And there will be no more living memory touchstone. Everything will be in newspaper articles or magazines or maybe videos. When look at great-grandpa back there when he used to say, oh yeah, great-grandpa, he used to leave his door unlocked. What a fool. The shift that has happened in the West, I need to divide the West here for a moment between Europe and the United States because there has been an injection of something which has sped this process up. You used to need 4 cycles of this to happen, 4 cycles of 20 years. That's why we call it 4 and 20. Used to need 4 cycles of that. That happened in Europe. It took about 80 to 100 years for Europe to come tumbling down to reach the point where it is now. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard that there are birth replacement rates are nowhere near enough to sustain the population, that Germany itself is actually shrinking, that Italy is shrinking in native-born population. Excuse me. We've all heard of these things. They're all true. Europe took about 100 years, again, thinking back to St. Pius X's encyclical we discussed last night, Pascendi. Thinking back to that, he wrote that about 100 years ago, and it has taken about 100 years to get to where we are with this state now, 103, 104. In the United States and Europe to a degree, things have accelerated at a much quicker pace. It doesn't take 4 generations now, 4 cycles for this to happen. It takes 4 cycles for the living memory to go away. But the abandonment of these cultural morals and acceptance of these secular heresies has happened at a much faster rate here. the groups that the 55 to 75-year-old group that are the children of the 75 plus, that group abandoned these social morals. They abandoned them. The younger groups abandoned them at a faster rate. Why? Because of technology. In the beginning of the 1900s, still, most people didn't read. There was no such thing as the internet. If you went to a movie, it was a very odd person who was going to a movie. The technology was not there. People did not have television sets in their house. Radios didn't exist. So all of the kind of means of communicating these things to each other didn't exist. It was just the means we have now. It was just, hey, did you hear? Did you hear? There'd be discussions. It was a different world. Today, look at your cell phone, look at your iPhone, look at your iPod. All of a sudden, off goes some message. You know, this happened, and within seconds, the entire world knows something. That has presented a case where the non-truth can be spread instantaneously. And a very disturbing fact, this is very disturbing fact, that among Catholic youth who are under, by Catholic youth it's under 30, the number of Catholic youth, or the percentage of Catholic youth who we are constantly hearing and want to hang on to every good piece of news we hear, no matter how infrequent it is. We're just dying to hear something good. So when we hear something, we cling on to it and we won't let go. And we ignore other things. Catholic youth under 30 are extremely pro-life. They despise abortion, they think it's horrible, etc., etc., etc. However, when you ask that same Catholic youth, what do you think about homosexual marriage, they're in favor of it. Vast majority of Catholic youth support so-called homosexual rights. The same ones who are out there marching at the March for Life in D.C. don't have an objection, don't understand the church's teaching when it comes to homosexuality. When you ask them things about the contraceptive mentality that rules the day, should people be allowed to live together before marriage? On all of these things, you do not get the same level of response that you get with regard to the issue of abortion. So what has happened? Well, one truth from the secular heresy world has been pulled back over to its proper place. Children have a right to live. They have a right to be born. But the same people who hold that also hold many of these same values, if you want to call them that, values of the secular world. That's eye-popping and it's disturbing. It's extremely disturbing. And again, the vast majority of Catholics do not know their faith. They do not know their faith. I was reading an article a couple hours ago, and the article made the very interesting point that back in the 1950s or so and earlier, whether there was a formal cooperation between the church and the state, in some countries there was, in some countries there wasn't, but there was at least a tacit cooperation that the church preached, this is the truth, these are the morals, this is how you live your life, and the laws of the state supported that and enforced that. The attitudes of the culture supported that. Even if they wouldn't go vote for the Pope for president, they still supported the moral life and the moral understanding of that. Those days are gone. They are done. And they are not coming back, not in our lifetime. So it used to be easy to be a Catholic, to be a good Catholic 50 years ago. You used to be able to turn on TV and watch either Milton Berle or Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen. And Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen was kicking Milton Berle's Burl, his Milton. When you went to the movies, there were loads of Catholic movies coming out. Any of you ever heard of the movie The Song of Bernadette? That won Academy Awards. That was Jennifer Jones. Jennifer Jones won the Academy Award for portraying Bernadette Subaru. Can you imagine, Saint Bernadette Subaru, can you imagine that happening today? it's laughable, as your initial response would be. I went to go see a movie, The Rite, which was about exorcism. I was so astonished that a Catholic truth came out in the movie at the end that I went and saw it 3 times. Just thinking, well, I know they're going to change the end of the movie. Somehow this got past the secular humanist censors. How could they possibly let this happen? Every now and then something good slips through. But to be a Catholic today in this culture is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult to go have a dinner with your family and have a good Catholic setting. It becomes more difficult the more people you widen your circle and go out to. For many, many people, it's difficult to go to their parish for Mass on Sunday and find something that is understandably, visibly, perceptibly Catholic. It becomes even more difficult as you go out into the world itself, the secular world, because the truth that the church teaches has been abandoned by the world. Now, a lot of the causes for that are what we're going to get into in our next 2 conferences later today. But the idea of being Catholic today is a laughable thing. It's a laughable thing because the majority of people, whether they know it or not, whether they would express it this way or not, subscribe to this secular humanist orthodoxy, heresies against the truth. They don't see it that way because they think, well, I get to decide what the truth is. This has been the case, if we look at our little blocks, our 4 blocks, this has been the case now since block 3, the 55 to 75-year-olds. This was the group that essentially walked away from the faith. They knew the faith because their parents had taught them the faith. The 75 to 95s had taught the 55 to 75s the faith. They knew what it was, and this is the group that grew up with Woodstock, grew up with the sexual revolution, with the pill, and all of that, and they simply walked away from the faith. They have transmitted this down to the next generation, the generation that I'm in, where we got nothing, essentially nothing. You got some practices and outward vestiges of the faith, but the reason for it is gone. So now my generation begets the next generation, the under 35s, and forget it. Forget it. There simply is no even understanding in this group that there is any truth except my truth. You live the way you want to live, I'll live the way I want to live. Is there any Catholic who can answer the question why it's bad for Bob and Steve to be married living 3 doors down while me and Mary are here married with our 3 or 4 kids? Let them live the way they want to live, I'll live the way I want to live. I venture if you ask any of your friends or relatives who profess to be Catholic to be able to answer that question, they couldn't give you an answer to it. And because they can't provide an answer to that one secular heresy, just one, they accept it as a truth. I've heard theologians argue that abortion is fine. Regrettable, but fine. Always an option. When these sorts of walking away from the truth, when these occurrences happen, this is the world you get. And as we look through what is the cause of these secular heresies, what causes them, we have to look at who gave up the truth. Because these secular heresies are anti-truths. That's what they are. In the end, it's a war between truth and anti-truth. Not different understandings of the truth, but anti-truth. It is anti-truth that there can be a loving, fruitful relationship in a so-called gay marriage. It is anti-truth that a woman has reproductive rights for her own body. It is anti-truth that children do not need 2 parents, and on and on and on. And all of the heresies, the secular heresies, every one of them is opposed to the truth. It is not an interpretation of the truth or a slight misinterpretation of the truth. So how did this come about? Well, we touched on some of it last night when we looked at Pope St. Pius's encyclical Pascendi. He saw this coming. He saw this coming. And as you look through it, what he saw coming was an abandonment of the intellectual, of the use of reason in favor of passions. And that takes us right back to the Garden of Eden. Before the fall in Eden, man's reason and passions were properly ordered. Now they've become inverted. And we all know that, people who try to live a life that's faithful know that from the moment we realize it until the moment we die, our life is a struggle of putting those reasons and passions back into their proper position. It's that simple. We're trying to get back to restore the way we were created to be. And thank God we die. Thank God we die. People often think to themselves, oh, death is this horrible thing. And of course, there's horrible aspects to it, saying goodbye to someone you love, the person dying, the fear, the unknown, all these kinds of things that go along with it, the grief, the mourning, the missing, all of that. But God, in his goodness, allowed death because when our human nature fell and was muddied by sin, if we lived forever on this earth, he wouldn't have the opportunity to restore our human natures and our bodies to a state of perfection. We would continue living in this state forever, wanting the truth, seeking after happiness, and every time we thought we'd found it, looking for love in all the wrong places, all of a sudden something else would come crashing down. If you ask people, I've never in my life have I heard anybody answer yes to the question, would you live your life over again? I've never heard anybody answer yes to that question. Because you understand, especially the attuned Catholic mind understands that this life is not the reason we were made. This life is what we were made for, to muddle and fight our way through. Pope Pius IX said, Catholics are born for combat. Catholics are born for combat. You spend this life fighting. That's what this life is about. I believe it was St. Ignatius, I might be incorrect on that, but I believe it was St. Ignatius of Loyola who said, in this life, in this battle, you either fight or you die. There is no retreat if you're trying to live a faithful life. You either fight or die. And the only way to win this battle is to die fighting. Now, that may not seem like the cheeriest of outlooks, but it's true. And go back to our glorious apostle, St. Paul. What are essentially his dying words? I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. And now a crown of glory awaits me. That's a truth that the world simply doesn't want to accept, because it means that if you're going to struggle through this, you don't get the fruit. You don't get to reach out and grab the fruit. You don't get to become like gods. If you want to know all of salvation history, if you want to know all of the struggle that mankind perpetually finds itself in, the battle between anti-truth and truth, it is all summed up in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. Read that one chapter. It's all right there. Satan, the serpent, makes his sneaky attack. He engages the intellect. You notice that? That's the first thing he does. He engages the intellect of Eve. He asks her a question. And the question is a lie. the question is a lie. Is it true that God said you can't eat of any of the fruit here? First of all, when a snake starts talking to you, your first reaction is to get up and leave. It's not to say, oh no, Mr. Snake, let me fill you in. And it has been ever since. It's the intellect that gets tricked. You can't have a devotional life. You can't have a prayer life. None of that will happen if you don't understand the need, if you don't understand the situation that you're in, if you don't understand and know the faith. It doesn't help. Why would anybody pray? Why would anybody say a rosary? You look at anybody under 40, 50, 60 today who's Catholic and say, hey, say a rosary with me. A what? My rose bushes? What? They don't understand the need for all of the stuff the church gives because they don't understand this great battle that we're in. There are signs of the battle everywhere, to be certain. Absolutely, there are signs of the battle everywhere. You can skip the theological, Catholic, religious aspect of this for a moment. You can simply have a discussion with them about the so-called culture wars. You can have a discussion about the red state, blue state issue. Isn't this truth, anti-truth battle, what's at the heart of that really? Isn't that the bedrock of what's going on politically? Of course it is. It's two different worldviews. I'm not boiling this into Republican and Democrat. I'm saying that there are those polar understandings of what is truth, points to the fact that even in our natures, there's this reaching out for what is true. You have your view, I have my view. How do you get to the truth? The world says you can't get to the truth. What you say is true. Well, we all know how that turns out. Turns out exactly as the world has turned out right now, and is spiraling downward, and will continue to spiral downward. A lot of people use the analogy, we're heading towards the precipice. Folks, we fell off the precipice a good long time ago. What we're waiting for right now is the crash landing. What that means for us Catholics is, okay, when this crash landing happens, in whatever form it takes, what is our responsibility? What do we have to do? What do I have to do in my circle? In my family, my friends, the people I go to work with, the people I socialize, the people I have passing contact with at the gas station, whatever it is, what is my responsibility to do? When the ultimate beauty of Vatican II was that it really is the Vatican Council, the Ecumenical Council of the laity. You read through those documents and that's exactly what it is. It is a call to arms of the laity to learn the faith and know the faith. That was Blessed John the 23rd's vision, that the laity would go out into the world, not into the sanctuaries as Eucharistic ministers of Holy Communion, not as lectors, not as this, not as that. The church has its ministers. Thank you very much, fathers. The church has all of those people. Doesn't have enough right now, but it will. But the role of the laity is not to sanctify the sanctuary. The role of the laity is to sanctify the world. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to do. So then this was the vision of John the 23rd. The issue, and we'll use this as a wrap-up and get into, as a little preview of the after lunch conference, the issue with Vatican II is that it didn't really leave a lot of self-interpretation there. When you look at all of the previous councils of the church, all 20 councils prior to Vatican II, they made dogmatic statements. They made anathemas against people who disagreed with those statements or would speak against them. So there are these clear, definitive statements of you must believe this or you must believe that, and this is what the church means, and here is what we mean, period. Those self-interpreters aren't in the documents of Vatican II, at least not clearly. And there are all kinds of mixed signals in there, so that anybody can open up Vatican II, and if you happen to come at it from a faithful Orthodox standpoint, you go, oh, this is very clear, look at this. However, if you're somebody who doesn't like the faithful Orthodox thing, you say, oh, but look at this. And you come up with this whole other spitting out thing called the Spirit of Vatican II. Nowhere in Vatican II's documents does it say that Latin should be abandoned at Mass. Nowhere does it say in Vatican II that the priest should be facing the people. Nowhere. It doesn't say. As a matter of fact, it says the opposite of both of those. So this understanding that we just get to change things on a whim, as our Holy Father has said, creates a rupture with the past. The continuity is broken. And what Blessed John Paul and Benedict, who I believe one day will be blessed, or Saint Benedict himself, what they have been trying to do for the last 30-some years is, because they were both present at the council, is sort of interpret the council in the correct way and show those interpretations. And this is what the council means, particularly Benedict has made this like his passion. He's made it his passion as far as liturgy and liturgical reform. He's made it his passion as far as the devotional life. He declared the year of the priest to say we need to get back to the way, the proper understanding of the priesthood. All of this has gone askew, and we need to get back to the way this is supposed to be. And laity, that means you. That means me. It isn't enough to say when someone says, hey, what about, contraception? Oh, I don't know, go ask the priest. That doesn't cut it anymore. That hasn't cut it for 50 years, and we've seen the results of that. We are instructed to be, like we said last night, the salt of the earth and the light of the world. That's what our role is. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Father John Hardon. I'll wrap up with a disturbing quote that we can take to Mass with us. Father John Hardon, wonderful, wonderful man, saintly man, said that Catholics who do not evangelize should never entertain the hope of the beatific vision. Catholics who do not evangelize should not entertain the hope of the beatific vision. Said a little more calmly, Archbishop Fulton Sheen said, if you want to get to heaven, the quickest way is to take someone's hand and lead them there. That's our role. We can never forget. The church is a mission. It is to preach the mission to everyone we come into contact with, to preach the truth of the gospel, the truth, and be prepared to destroy these anti-truths in your life, in your words, in how you love. These anti-truths, this kingdom of anti-truth that has been established and rules supreme, must be attacked, boldly attacked by your knowledge and your hearts and your minds, because that is what you are baptized for. Now, how we got to this point in the culture and what we can do about it is going to be what we'll be talking about during the rest of the conference, and this is where it might get a little ugly, but we will try to keep it as nice as we can. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Sacred Heart of Jesus, Immaculate Heart of Mary, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.